Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Preface. In early 2023, I landed a job as an assistant manager at a local automotive shop. Our main business was selling tires and alloy wheels for passenger vehicles. The company had several stores across the city. My direct superior was the store manager, Jake, who reported to Sarah, the owner of the company. It didn't take long for me to notice that Jake's behavior was far from professional. He constantly mocked and belittled me for being the new guy. I suspected his attitude stemmed from jealousy and insecurity, especially after I started outperforming him in sales within the first few months. "Look at the new hot shot," Jake would sneer. "Think you're something special, don't you?" I'd shrug it off. "Just doing my job, Jake." Jake had a habit of knocking off work early and cracking open a beer while the rest of us were still on the clock. One day he overheard me talking about my MMA training sessions after work. "Oh, you're a tough guy, huh?" Jake taunted, puffing out his chest. "Why don't you show us some moves?" I could tell he was trying to goad me into a fight for his own amusement. "I'd rather not, Jake. That's not what MMA is about," I replied calmly. It was becoming clear that Jake didn't like me, and I started to suspect he was trying to provoke me into losing my cool, potentially jeopardizing my job. Little did I know things were about to get even more complicated. Story. During my first few months on the job, I noticed discrepancies between our daily takings and sales records. I'd often spend up to an hour after work trying to figure out where the errors were coming from. Jake, on the other hand, would simply throw his hands up in frustration. "I have no clue what's going on with these numbers," he'd say, shaking his head. "It's probably just a glitch in the system." The recurring issue seemed to be that our cash takings were recorded incorrectly. Sometimes there was excess cash that didn't match what was recorded in our sales software. Other times, there was less. As an accounting student working towards my bachelor's degree, I was immediately suspicious of these cash discrepancies. However, given Jake's treatment of me, I was worried that any complaint would somehow be twisted and used against me. And boy, was I right. Several weeks later, Jake took some time off. During this period, I not only managed to set a personal record in store sales, but also noticed something interesting. The cash was never out at the end of each shift. I reported this directly to Sarah, as I was expected to do while acting as manager in Jake's absence. "That's odd," Sarah said, frowning. "Have you noticed any patterns in when these discrepancies occur?" I hesitated before answering. Well, to be honest, they seem to happen more frequently when Jake is around. In all honesty, I was hopeful that Sarah would have a word with Jake about the discrepancies. However, I was also wary, knowing that once Sarah spoke to Jake, he would immediately suspect it was me who reported this. When Jake returned to work, he stormed up to me with a scowl on his face. "I've spoken with Sarah," he growled. "You tried to blame me for the discrepancies? You should focus on doing your job properly, then this wouldn't happen." I was taken aback by his anger, though not entirely surprised that he had twisted the situation to place blame on me. His reaction only made me more suspicious. He wants me to do my job properly, eh? Malicious compliance, here we come. That same week, I got to work. I started paying close attention to what customers were paying when dealing with Jake. Behind his back, I began examining all of his sale transactions and invoices with a fine-toothed comb. As the days rolled by, I started to find evidence of his dishonesty. When it came to cash sales, Jake was pulling a sneaky trick. Example: he would tell a customer, "That'll be $200 if you pay cash." Then he'd discount the price by $50 in the sales software. He'd put the full $200 into the till, but record only a $150 cash sale. Before we did the cash count at the end of the day, he would slyly pocket the extra cash when no one was around. However, he was careless, often unable to remember the exact amount he had swindled. This explained why the cash would be up some days, he didn't take enough, or down, he took too much. I meticulously documented everything, taking screenshots of the discounts he had been giving on sales. I compiled a detailed report of my findings and sent it all to Sarah. The report also showed that on all days Jake wasn't there for the cash count, there was no variance. When he was there, well, that was a different story. Sarah was livid. Jake had been her trusted employee for years. She was so furious that she ordered Jake to take a mandatory drug test on the spot. "Jake, I need you to take a drug test right now," Sarah said, her voice steely. Jake's face paled. "What? Why? This is ridiculous." "It's company policy, Jake. You know that," Sarah replied firmly. To no one's surprise, he failed. It turned out Jake had quite the meth habit. This was likely his primary motive for stealing cash, and Sarah was beside herself. We operate machinery every day in the store, so the thought of a manager walking around high as a kite wouldn't sit well with any health and safety professional. In fact, it could have landed Sarah in serious legal trouble if any accident or injury had occurred under Jake's watch. Jake was terminated immediately for violation of his contract and was later taken to court by Sarah in an attempt to recover the stolen funds. "I trusted you, Jake," Sarah said as she watched him clean out his desk. "I can't believe you'd put everything we've built at risk like this." Jake didn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I need help." "I hope you get it, Jake, but it won't be here," Sarah replied, her voice a mix of anger and sadness. Safe to say, I was promoted to store manager shortly after Jake's termination. As I settled into my new role, I couldn't help but reflect on the wild turn of events. It just goes to show sometimes doing your job properly can lead to unexpected results. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be telling a story like this, but here goes. A few years back, I inherited a nice little vacation cabin from my grandparents. It was tucked away in the mountains, about a 3-hour drive from where I lived. I was excited to fix it up and use it for weekend getaways. The cabin had been empty for a while, so I knew it needed some work. I spent months planning renovations and saving up money. Finally, I had enough saved and some time off work. I loaded up my truck with supplies and headed out, ready for a week of DIY renovations. When I pulled up to the cabin, I immediately knew something was off. There were curtains in the windows that I didn't recognize, and a beat-up old car was parked out front. My stomach dropped as I realized someone was inside my cabin. I cautiously approached and knocked on the door. A scruffy-looking guy answered, giving me a weird look. "Can I help you?" he asked gruffly. Yeah, this is my cabin. Who are you and why are you here?" I replied, trying to stay calm. The guy scoffed. "Your cabin? This is our place. We've been living here for months. You must be confused, buddy." I was stunned. "No, there's no confusion. This cabin belonged to my grandparents and they left it to me. I have the deed and everything. You need to leave immediately." The guy just laughed and slammed the door in my face. I stood there in disbelief for a minute before pulling out my phone to call the police. As I was talking to the dispatcher, the guy came back out with a woman. "Listen, pal, we don't want any trouble," the woman said. "But we bought this place fair and square a few months ago. We have all the paperwork inside. So you need to get off our property before we call the cops on you." My head was spinning. How could they have bought it? I knew for a fact the cabin was in my name. I told them I was already on the phone with the police and they'd be here soon to sort this out. The couple went back inside, slamming the door again. I paced anxiously in the driveway, waiting for the police to arrive. When they finally got there about 30 minutes later, I quickly explained the situation. They went to talk to the couple inside while I waited by my truck. After what felt like forever, one of the officers came back over to me. "Sir, they're showing us what looks like legitimate paperwork for the purchase of this property. Do you have any documentation proving your ownership?" I felt sick. I have the deed and stuff at home. I didn't think I'd need to bring it with me. This doesn't make any sense." The officer sighed. "Well, without proof of ownership, there's not much we can do right now. This appears to be a civil matter at this point. I'd suggest contacting a lawyer to help sort this out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These random people were squatting in my cabin and there was nothing the police could do. I was furious and felt completely helpless. "Can I at least go inside and look around?" I asked desperately. "All my grandparents' stuff should still be in there." The officer went to check with the couple. He came back shaking his head. "I'm sorry, but they're not comfortable with that. Again, I know this is frustrating, but you'll need to go through proper legal channels to resolve this. We can't force them out without a court order." I was at a total loss. I numbly thanked the officers and got in my truck to leave. As I was pulling away, I saw the couple standing in the doorway smirking at me. I'd never felt so angry and violated. The next few weeks were a nightmare of stress and confusion. I immediately contacted a lawyer and we started digging into what the hell had happened. It turned out these people had somehow gotten a hold of my personal information. Social security number, bank details, everything. They used it to forge documents selling them my cabin. They even set up fake email accounts in my name to communicate with the title company. My lawyer said it was one of the most elaborate cases of identity theft and real estate fraud he'd ever seen. We had to jump through endless legal hoops to prove I was the rightful owner and get the fraudulent sale overturned. It took over 2 months before we were finally able to get a court order to evict those scumbags. When I was finally able to legally enter my own damn cabin, I was horrified by what I found. The place had been completely trashed. They'd sold or destroyed almost all the furniture and family heirlooms my grandparents had left. The hardwood floors were ruined. There was garbage and dog crap everywhere. I later learned they'd been running some kind of meth lab operation out of my kitchen. The damage was extensive. I was beyond devastated. This special place that held so many childhood memories was violated and destroyed. And to make matters worse, the lawyer fees and repair costs were astronomical. I had to take out a second mortgage on my primary home just to cover everything. The silver lining was that we were eventually able to track down and arrest the couple who did this. Turns out they were part of a larger criminal organization that specialized in identity theft and real estate fraud. They're now serving long prison sentences. It's been a few years now, and I've slowly been restoring the cabin. It's not the same as it was, but I'm trying to make new memories there. I've also become borderline obsessive about protecting my identity and personal information. You never think something like this will happen to you until it does. So that's my insane story of how my neighbors quite literally stole my identity and my vacation home. It was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone. Always be careful with your personal info, folks. You never know who might try to use it against you. The next one is a petty revenge story. When I was in high school, I wasn't very popular, nor did I have a lot of friends. I was picked on and bullied quite a bit, especially by the people in my grade and classes. I was chubbier back then, and the students in my class had given me the esteemed and clever nickname of Fat Ass, and that's what they called me throughout high school. It sucked, but I never let it get to me. The last time I saw most of them was in the government-required provincial exam where we were all gathered together in the auditorium to do one final test. This was taken very seriously. Once the test started, we couldn't talk, get up, or look around, all under the supervision of our 3 principals. It was just after the test started when I felt it. This grumbling, gurgling thing was rapidly traveling through my innards, and I knew this was going to be bad. I raised my hand, a principal came by, and I asked to go to the washroom. Before I could even finish, he stopped me and said, "You should have gone before the exam. No one is allowed to leave. You'll have to hold it." This was not something that could be contained. I doubt it was even from this world. It was coming, and it would not be ignored. I discreetly looked around at my classmates who had tortured me for years and knew what had to be done. I leaned forward, lifted my ass off the chair, and unleashed the biggest, loaded fart of my life. Its birth call encompassed the entirety of the auditorium and was immediately met with laughter and jeers from my classmates. The principals sprang into action, attempting to get the situation under control, telling everyone to quiet down and get back to their tests. And then the smell hit. This had the pungent aroma of 7-day-old Texas roadkill left in the sun and marinated in a finely aged cream garnished with straight sewage. Everyone started coughing, hacking, making disgusted sounds, and trying to get up. I fondly remember one person saying, "My eyes." Again, the principals told everyone they couldn't leave. This is a provincial exam. Sit down and finish the test. I was crying with silent laughter while the principals were desperately opening doors and windows, but it didn't help. We sat in that foul funk for 15 minutes before it returned to whatever world it crawled out of. I moved and never saw them again, but I'll always remember the principals gagging while trying to waft the fumes out with an open-close motion with the doors. The next one is a malicious compliance story. For this story, you need to know that I am the kind of person who will go a great distance for a good laugh, as you will see below. I love this story, and we tell it every once in a while, even though it has been more than 20 years. I live in the US, and I own an IT support company. Many years ago, I used a cell phone company named Nextel. They had this great push-to-talk feature that turned your phone into a walkie-talkie, which was perfect for communicating with coworkers in my IT work. However, their customer service was a nightmare. Anytime I needed to contact them, it would take at least 30-40 minutes on hold. Eventually, I had to switch to a cheaper service, which meant getting a new number. Now you can port your number to a new carrier, but back then you had to change numbers if you switched carriers. I canceled all the phones on our plan except for mine, which I downgraded to an emergency plan costing about $10 a month. I left the old phone plugged in at my office and set my voicemail message to instruct callers of my new number. The phone just sat next to my desk on a shelf, plugged into a charger so that I could see if anyone called. I could also hear the phone make a sound when it disconnected from the cellular network, and then a different sound when it connected to the cellular network. It connected and disconnected constantly there in my office. I would estimate that it only stayed connected to the network about 50% of the time. After 6 months, I decided to cancel it. I had to wait on hold for the customary 30 to 40 minutes just to cancel my service. After telling the service rep that I was always dropping off the network and that I had already switched services, they verified the service problems on my account and canceled my entire plan. I wasn't under any contract at the time, so there was no problem canceling my service with Nextel. As expected, I got my final bill. It was somewhere around $10 since that was my monthly plan, just the emergency plan, and I didn't make any phone calls. I paid the bill and was happy to be done with that carrier. Then the next month, I got a bill for 4 cents. Yes, just 4 cents. I figured it was a clerical error and ignored it, expecting them to write it off. But no, each month another bill for 4 cents arrived. I was incredulous. I checked the postmark and saw that the postage to send me the bill was costing them 10 times more than the bill itself. And they kept sending the bill every month. I could have paid the bill, but it seemed ridiculous to write a check for 4 cents and spend more on a stamp. After 6 months, I finally had enough and decided on some very petty, malicious compliance. I decided to invest the 40 minutes on hold to call Nextel to work this out. By golly, if they wanted my 4 cents, I would give them my 4 cents. I planned to wait on hold for 40 minutes and pay the 4 cents with a credit card, knowing it would cost them more in fees. I told my wife about my plan, thinking it was the perfect malicious compliance story. But my wife, the true master of malicious compliance, suggested an even better idea. Call and ask if I could make payments on the 4 cents, splitting it into 2 payments on my credit card. OMG, I was in the presence of malicious royalty. I called, waited on hold for 45 minutes, and finally got through to a representative. The representative sounded like one of those airport terminal attendants who act like they are checking your reservations, but instead they are writing a Stephen King-length novel. I could hear the clickety-clackety sound of the keyboard. The female representative was constantly typing as I explained that I had canceled my service but kept getting the final bill and proposed making payments. The representative, typing away, said she'd look up my account. As she typed away at her keyboard, I explained that I had gotten the final bill and that I would like to set up a payment plan to take care of the outstanding balance. I told her that I would like to pay half on my credit card today and pay the remaining half the following month. She was agreeing with me and typing away when suddenly she stopped typing and went quiet. "Sir," she said. "Yes?" I replied. "Are you aware of the balance amount?" "Yes," I said. "4 cents?" she said. "Yes," I said. "I figured that you really wanted that 4 cents because you keep spending all this postage to send me bills each month, so I'm just calling you to take care of it." After a brief silence, I heard the clickety-clack of the keyboard again, and she said that I would not have to worry about the balance because she was writing it off. I insisted on giving my credit card for the first half of the payment, but she firmly dismissed it and assured me I wouldn't get any more bills. My wife's suggestion turned a simple prank into a masterpiece of malicious compliance. I may be good at it, but my wife is on another level. And you really have to want to do malicious compliance to wait on hold for 40 minutes. The next one is an entitled people's story. I work retail and this guy bought something online and had it delivered. After receiving it, he decided he didn't want it anymore, so he asked to return it for a refund. I said, "Sure, no problem, just send it back with the returns form found on our website and ship it back to us." He then got super pissed that he had to print off a form. Like most people my age, I don't have a ducking printer. So I said, "Okay, fine, don't print out the form, just include a handwritten note and ship it back to us." And how am I supposed to do that? By taking it to the post office? And what? You're expecting me to pay for shipping? Well, it's your choice to send it back, so... Back in my day, stores provided a little something called customer service. I expect to receive that from you as well. Annoyed at the entitlement, but also just exhausted of the bullcrap, I agreed to provide a return label. I asked him to move the conversation to email, though, since I can't provide him a return label over the phone. So he sent his email, rehashed all his nonsense from the phone call, and I replied with this: "I can provide you a return label, but you need to be able to print it off so you can attach it to the item." That was 2 months ago, and he never replied to that email. Today he called back. "Hi, it's Bob. Remember me?" "Sorry, Bob, but I speak to many people every day. You'll need to refresh my memory." And with that, he was fuming again. It was like me not remembering him was the worst sort of insult. He rehashed everything again, and then it all come flooding back. My immediate thought was, didn't this happen months ago? And I was right, it did. I checked the email chain and I sent my email on June 16th. He again complained about having to ship it back himself and having to have access to a printer, but I just said because I was annoyed, that's the way the world works now, I can't change that. So he said, I'm sick of this, I've had enough of this for today, I'll call back later. Then he hung up. I was hoping that would be the last of him for another 2 months, but no, he replied to my email from 2 months ago within an hour. He again started complaining about how we have made this difficult for him and that we should make accommodations for people that don't have a printer. I replied saying, we can provide you with a PDF of the label, and if you don't have a printer, then you could ask a friend or a relative or even the post office to print it for you. Here is the kicker, the absolute cherry on top of his entitlement. This is your problem to fix, not mine. Your store has set up a system that requires the use of a printer without any consideration for people that are too old to use modern technology. I will not go out of my way to fix a problem that you created. You need to tell the courier to print the label themselves and have them deliver the label to my house. Wow, I haven't replied yet, but there are so many things I would like to say. Firstly, this is our system. Welcome to the 21st ducking century, you decrepit idiot. We didn't invent the need for a printer. Couriers are the ones that generate the PDFs, not us, but that is the easiest way to do it. Your refusal to understand that does not make you right. Secondly, this is definitely a you problem. I understand not owning your own printer because I don't own one either, but you could easily take the PDF to a friend or a family member that does have one. Even if you don't have friends, shocking, or a family, you could take the item to the post office and ask them to print the label and stick it on the ducking parcel. But no, you have such a vendetta against technology that you refuse to partake in it. It's almost as if you think finding a printer somehow enables this behavior, and your refusal to use a printer is an act of defiance meant to break us from our reliance on technology so we can go back to a simpler time. Well, buddy, I've had enough. Either pay to ship it back yourself or forget about your refund. You don't want to enable our reliance on technology, fine, but I don't want to enable your entitlement. So if this is our stalemate, so be it. We don't lose anything. You're the one that wants to return it all because you changed your mind, so the next move is yours. The next one is an entitled parent story. I just listened to this story in a casual conversation of my elderly relatives, and it is a nasty shock. I asked my mom, and it is true, only they told me a censored version. I knew my grandparents told my dad to move out when he was young, but the version my dad told me was, it happened when he finished high school and applied for a job. Real version is worse. My grandmother married young and had my dad 6 months after the wedding. Back then you were expecting, you married after parents of both parties made a deal. So this happened here. When my dad was born, his father went to party because he had a son. And when my dad was 6 days old, there was an accident. His dad on a bike versus a truck. Truck's driver survived. There was no insurance because my grandfather was very drunk. So the situation for my grandmother wasn't easy. No job, no money, infant. When my dad was 7, his grandparents arranged a marriage for their daughter. My step-grandfather was scared of being a father as a young adult, but did whatever possible with his limited resources. My grandmother got odd jobs, went drunk, got fired. It happened so many times that later they decided she was to stay home and take care of her kids. My dad was a replacement parent for his step-siblings. Here is where it gets bad. When my dad was 16 and in high school, he wasn't a bad student. His younger brothers and sister were bad students. One of his younger brothers wasn't promoted to next class in elementary school. My grandmother got mad and forced my dad out. Take your clothes and get out. And she screamed at him, "We will see how long you stay in high school now." Back then, there were laws that kids were to stay in school till they were 18, and it was illegal to hire a minor. My dad got some odd jobs. Parents of his schoolmates let him stay for several weeks. One of his teachers let him stay, and got a lawyer to check if emancipation was allowed in this case. My grandmother went to court and lied. She never had forced him out, but he was a bad son, always drinking, bad grades, always playing truant, beating his siblings, and so on. That Traker had school records of my dad and somehow records of his siblings, but still no emancipation. Judge was in position to force my grandmogger to take my dad in, but refused. My step-grandfather promised and delivered money every month. He was a better parent than my grandmother. Dad finished that high school, and there was talk about university, but then got a job, found a place to stay, met my mom. After the wedding, they first lived with my grandparents. Supposedly, many times strangers arrived asking for money my drinking relatives were supposed to pay. It ended when my parents got their own place. Several years of no contact and my stepfather died. They owned a flat that my grandmother inherited, no mortgage. Also, she had no retirement money because she mostly didn't work, but according to our law had 80% of her husband's retirement money. So it was all set. She contacted my dad once to tell him he would never get that flat and his stepfather's money, so there. Fast forward more years and suddenly a clerk from a hospital calls. My grandmother had diabetes. Never treated, she kept drinking. More. She had money for vodka but not for utilities and rent. Got many notifications, ignored, drunk more. At a certain point was so in debt that it was more than the value of her flat, so she lost it. Her good kids had money for vodka, but not for their mom. Her only daughter was married and wanted to take a credit, bail my grandmother and get that flat for her own kids. My grandmother didn't sign a contract for that flat. Just give me money and I will pay my debts. So my uncle blocked the transaction. First he wanted to help and pay, but not to give money when my grandmother takes all and promises to pay. So she lost that flat and some friends took her in. She badmouthed my dad and her daughter and son-in-law. Then one friend saw her real character, asked another person to take her in, then another and another. The last person returns home, and my grandmother and some of her sons are there drinking and many valuable items missing. That person said nothing, because they were one person versus several drinking, but waited, and when the sons went away, they called paramedics for an elderly lady with diabetes. She wasn't lucid and they weren't sure it was diabetes or all the alcohol. Cops arrived too, and tried to blame that host. They had a recording of themselves begging the sons not to share alcohol with my grandmother. So cops couldn't arrest the host. Paramedics took my Gerson mother to hospital. She lost both legs. Hospital kept her for several weeks and she gave my parents' address as her own. So a clerk called my parents. They had to show all the documents and explain. My grandmother herself went no contact, took credits for my dad, kept money he had to pay back, took a home her parents left for him, and more. Hospital couldn't demand my parents accept her. Actually, my dad wanted to, but my mom asked, "What will you do when your mom invites your brothers and one of them is so drunk that he kills me or our daughter me?" None of good sons took her in. Hospital clerks tried to put her in a home for elderly, but it didn't work. There was a rule, no alcohol, which she disregarded. She invited her sons, they had vodka, some items went missing from many rooms, you know the drill. Her daughter took her in and they moved to another place. They were to live with parents of son-in-law, that was the official reason. But it was 180 calls from our city, and there was hope all the stepbrothers of my dad wouldn't visit. They had no jobs, some money from adult protective services which used for vodka. They never visited, promised a lot, never got to it. I know my parents visited several times and left some money that my uncle took. Not for himself, but for money, some medical supplies, or to hire a nurse. He told them my aunt would give the money to her mother and she would drink. My grandmother died there and was buried locally. All her good sons went to her funeral and then started a huge quarrel. They demanded money from my parents and my aunt and uncle. You see, all four took pension money and got so rich, explaining that it all went to nurses and medical equipment didn't work. And this is a not censored story how one person wasted her life. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.